Hello, everyone, and welcome to Adoptions from the Heart TV. I'm your host, Amanda Aliberti. Today, we are joined by District Supervisor Christopher Pezska, who's going to share a little bit about our role as an agency when we're working with expecting and birth fathers. So welcome, Chris.
It's nice to be with you today, Amanda.
So, Chris, can you share with our audience what our role is in regards to expecting and birth fathers when they are noticed of the adoption planning that the expecting mother may be making, what role we play in their lives?
Yeah, I think it's important to keep in mind that expecting and birth fathers are just as important in the process as expecting and birth mothers are, and that they have equal rights to decide about the pregnancy and what they want to do with the child. I think those are the two most important things that come to mind.
And how would we navigate as an agency, as a social worker, if maybe the birth father and the expecting mother don't get along? Maybe they don't, want to be in the same room or that sort of thing. How do we handle that as an agency?
Well, I certainly think we can accommodate that. And, I often suggest to expecting and birth fathers, because it's possible that they are not in a relationship or they're not in a relationship any longer and they were, that we can certainly meet with them individually. We certainly want to explore all the options with expecting and birth fathers, just as we do with expecting and birth mothers. And I think a lot of our adoption counselors are very skilled in really working with both expecting or birth parents about what's going to be best for them as parents, as well as what's going to be best for the child. So we certainly can accommodate that and provide services to both expecting birth fathers and birth mothers.
So when the agency does make contact with an expecting or birth father and say they did not know that, there's an adoption plan potentially happening, what rights do men have when we make that call to them?
Well, essentially, it may vary state by state with some specifics, but I think that in general, expecting and birth fathers have the same rights as birth mothers do regarding making an adoption plan. I very much encourage expecting fathers, because they may not have known about the pregnancy, or in some cases may not have even known about the birth until afterwards, and then they're notified. So I strongly encourage them to come in and meet with our staff so they can get educated and informed about their rights, about their options. And I think it's only in their best interest to have that conversation, get that information, and then really make an informed decision after getting that information. In my experience meeting with expecting and birth fathers, I think there's some misconceptions or myths about adoption. And I think it's important to get the facts and dispel some of those myths and misconceptions. I've had fathers, take the position of, well, this is my biological child. I don't want some stranger raising them. Or I'm just not willing to give up my rights to this child. Or if I do choose adoption, I'm worried I'll never see or hear from my child again. And that's not really the case in open adoption. So getting that information, getting the facts, I think is really crucial in the process.
And what happens if a birth mom and birth father have differing opinions on what type of open adoption they're looking for?
Well, they can certainly tailor what type of openness they'd like to each of them individually. And just because one either wants openness and the other doesn't, or wants a degree of openness that's different than the other parent, they can really customize and tailor the type of openness that they're comfortable with. And that can certainly also change over time as well, whether it's more openness or less openness. It's really up to them, and each parent, they don't have to agree or have the exact same level of openness in their adoption.
What would you share for adopting families who are trying to envision what their future triad would look like in regards to birth fathers? Because I still think that there is a lot of stereotype misconception that it's just about the birth mom and having that contact or whatnot. So what would you like prospective adoptive families to know about birth fathers?
Yeah, I think that seems to be the default or the focus, that adoptive parents tend to focus on the birth mother, and that's understandable. She's the one that delivers the baby, and, they often, meet her at the hospital. I think it's being open-minded and being flexible and knowing that there's a father involved who's a birth father of this child, and that he may choose to want to be involved in the child's life and have some openness. So what that's going to look like varies greatly, but I think having that flexibility and that open-mindedness is really important.
I also want to add that It's important that we take all necessary steps to search and notify birth fathers. And I think there's this misconception of like, let's ignore him, or, what is this going to look like, Adoptions from the Heart, if you find this birth father that she has named. And it's important to remember, we're not trying to hide anything. The goal is actually to find him, to properly notify him, to make sure that he understands what his rights are, so that we can securely make this adoption plan happen if all parties want that to be that way.
Yeah, and I think that's true in that sometimes birth fathers and expectant fathers are forgotten about or minimized. And we certainly do take an active role in that, because as we said at the very beginning, birth fathers have the same rights as birth mothers in terms of making an adoption plan. So, when we have a father's name, but we don't have an address or a location, we do have to search for him. Once we connected with him, we do have to notify him at the very least of the adoption plan and what his rights are, and then what his options and choices are at that point. Again, we very much promote, let's have a conversation, let's talk about your options. I think sometimes birth fathers or expecting fathers are worried if they meet with us, they're going to be pressured to signing a piece of paper and give away their rights. And that's not what that meeting's about. The meeting is about informing them of their rights, educating them about their options, exploring all those options, and having them make a decision that's best for them.
And even in emergency placement situations, if we have made contact with a birth father and he is saying that he's unsure as to what he wants to do moving forward, we as an agency will put a pause on the processing of everything, because we do not want to get an adoptive family or a prospective adoptive family involved in a situation that's any more risky than it has to be.
Correct. And, ultimately, in some cases, birth fathers decide that they do want to parent their child, and we really want to avoid having the adoption be disrupted. So that's why we take those proactive steps. And if that's the case, then certainly, our staff will meet with him about what his plan is. And there is some information that we do like to assess, especially when the birth mother has said that she would like to make an adoption plan and was moving towards that, because ultimately we do have the responsibility to make sure that the child is safe. So does he have adequate housing? Does he have the financial means to care for the child? And even just some of the physical things. Does he have a support system? Does he have a car seat? Does he have diapers and formula and things like that if the baby's going to be, discharged from the hospital and he's going to be parenting the child? But I think that it's our responsibility to make sure that we explore all those issues.
In your experience, Chris, how do you feel like the level of birth father participation has either increased or decreased over the years? It's
hard to really see a trend. I mean, I would say roughly, half of the adoptions that I've done, the birth father is involved to some degree, and then the other half, not very involved at all. Either we just don't know his identity, he's unnamed or unknown, or his involvement is minimal. We have some fathers that are informed and say, that's fine. If the birth mother wants to make an adoption plan, I'll agree to that. I'll sign the documents. I'll do what's needed. But in other cases, we just, despite our best efforts, aren't able to identify or locate him. So it does vary, but I think that's also a challenge for adoptive parents to not really know, if we're selected by an expecting or birth mother, what is the situation with the birth father? Do we know who he is? Do we have a name, but we don't know where he's located? Is he going to be involved in the planning? So I think that having that open-mindedness and flexibility regarding who the expecting and birth father is and what role he may or may not play in the adoption is going to be really important for adoptive parents to keep in mind. There's
Sure.
a lot of unknowns often.
Well, and I think the more that Adoptions from the Heart continues to spread positive adoption awareness in a variety of community spaces, I think you're seeing more and more men who are aware, somewhat more knowledgeable about open adoption, willing to at least take the phone call and learn more about the process and maybe why the birth mother is choosing adoption. So I feel like it is a reflection on adoption in itself and open adoption becoming more and more common and talked about. So it's less of a stigma, and as a result of that, you have birth fathers who are willing to at least be open-minded to hearing about it.
And that's been my experience, and I hope we continue to promote that and educate just the public at large about this. But there's been many, many times where an expecting and birth father, once they got the facts and got information and understood how open adoption works, were very much in favor of moving forward with the adoption because they didn't believe that that was going to be a possibility. So I think it's important to keep spreading that word and educating people about open adoption and how it works.
Absolutely. And to folks who may be listening in on this interview, please know that we have supportive services for men. If you're interested in connecting with other birth fathers who have been in your shoes, just want to talk about options and what worked, what didn't work, we can always connect you to birth fathers who have experienced adoption before, and you can lean on them for support.
Yeah, I think it's also important to note that just like with birth mothers who make an adoption plan, we continue to provide supportive services after place if both birth parents choose adoption. That's either some individual counseling, referral to other services, or just the general support that we provide either in a group setting, and as you said, connecting them with other fathers who have gone through this before and have been through the process and can share what their open adoption relationship is like and what's worked well and what the challenges have been. I think sharing with other folks is really important, to know that you're not the only person that has gone through this experience.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Chris, for sharing. I know Adoptions from the Heart really takes pride in the efforts we provide to search, notify, and include birth fathers on adoption planning, and I'm hopeful that this can help folks learn more about birth father participation.
Quite welcome.
Thank you so much, everyone, and continue to tune in.